We've entered the final section of Being in Nothingness. And in this first chapter of this last section, we're going to address the topic of doing. And so the questions that we're going to address in this video based on this chapter are the following. One, what are actions and how are they connected to freedom and consciousness? Two, how do ends, motives, and causes factor into our actions? Three, what is the relationship between the given, facticity, freedom, and situation? Finally, four, what are the different aspects of being in a situation? First, actions are not merely physical changes of a body in the world, but represent the manifestation of a consciousness. That is, an action is on principle intentional. Second, this intentional consciousness aims at an identified lack in being, an unactualized possibility, or a desirable. Third, actions also reveal and express our freedom, and intentional consciousness is equated to this freedom. One might say that, as such, freedom constitutes the essence of our being. Yet this freedom is more accurately characterized by nothingness. It is the choice to annihilate something so as to bring something else into being without itself being something that does the annihilating. It's a pure activity, a pure doing. Freedom has no essence in itself, but is what founds all essences by actualizing possibilities. As such, this intentional consciousness that is freedom exists beyond all essences, beyond all causes and motivations associated with my acts. The implication of this is that there are no limits to my freedom, except the necessity of freedom itself. That is, I am condemned to be free. How are we then to think about the ends, motivations, and causes associated with my actions? Some definitions are first in order before we can address that question. Ends are the goals or aims I seek to achieve with my acts. Such ends are connected to projects that organize my actions toward a common purpose. Motives are inner subjective desires, emotions, and passions that drive actions, whereas causes are external objective states of affairs that can explain why particular actions were taken. Despite being distinguished in this way, ends, motives, and causes are intertwined aspects of decision making. Human actions do not result from them, though. Instead, they are the outcome of a consciousness actively engaging with the world, defining its own existence. In other words, particular motives and causes reveal themselves only in the wake of a free choice for its own ends and possibilities, and this choice carves out causes in the world and motives within me. Freedom is thus an indivisible whole, expressing the unity of causes, motives, and ends. Nonetheless, motives and causes do provide a resistance to our free acts, and section 2 of this chapter will describe some of those manners of resisting. Though free, our actions are not random but stem from an original project that defines our being. Such projects are not merely about one possibility, but mark an ensemble or collection of particular possibles that form a unitary synthesis. So, for example, I'm recording this video in order to present it on this platform, which is part of my larger possibility of seeking to deepen and share my philosophical explorations. And perhaps that's connected to an even greater set of purposes, etc. While we are engaged in our projects, we exist in continuous pursuit of actualizing this ensemble of possibilities connected to them. However, the instant can emerge as a rupture in this continuity when one project ends and another begins. This instant is both a beginning and an end, encapsulating a radical modification of my fundamental project and representing a break in the unity of my being. It is through this temporal structure that we understand ourselves and our choices in relation to past and future. The instant, therefore, is not a static point, but a dynamic intersection of temporal dimensions within our lived experience. And true change requires a radical modification of the fundamental project, which is a difficult and profound transformation that may be marked by these moments of conversion. These moments represent the clearest expression of our freedom as they involve a complete overhaul of our prior project and the emergence of a new one. And so the instant is always, in a sense, threatening to upend our lives, so to speak. And this is the tenuousness of every project that we engage in. For Sartre, freedom is a radical freedom in that it cannot be curtailed by motives or causes. But freedom itself is not a freedom of outcome from our actions, or it's not the obtaining of what one has wished for, but rather it's a freedom of choosing our acts, of determining oneself to wish, and more foundationally, of choosing the fundamental projects that guide our acts. Yet, as Sartre writes, freedom consists in reminding us of our impotence. Far from being able to modify our situation at our whim, we seem to be unable to change ourselves. I am not free either to escape the lot of my class, of my nation, of my family, or even to build up my own power or my future, or to conquer my most insignificant appetites and habits. Doesn't this then disqualify what Sartre has already said to us about freedom? Sartre's answer is no, and that to think it does is to base our thinking on a naive approach to the age-old debate between freedom and determinism. Sartre does not deny our facticity, which includes our concrete physical situation and limitations that we cannot alter. Yet the essence of freedom lies in the ability to pursue ends that are not yet realized. And it is the very existence of obstacles that allows us to exercise and affirm that freedom. So, freedom is not the absence of resistance, but an engagement with the world that both defines and is defined by our choices. Conversely, our understanding of our facticity is only possible through the exercise of this freedom, particularly in the choices we make. It's through these choices that we come to recognize the constraints of our situation. So, for this reason, Sartre can say the master and slave are both radically free. Now, such a statement would seem absurd in the face of a common understanding of freedom. But in the way Sartre means it, both the slave and the master are free in the sense that they can make choices, and such choices will reveal a unique set of resistances that in no way provide some guarantee for the successful accomplishment of those choices in what they're aiming at. So before going any further, we need to more precisely consider the nature of these resistances, the facticity of freedom. Sartre introduces the concept of the given, which he equates with the in itself here. The given is the pure contingency and plenitude of being, which freedom, the for itself, negates in order to be itself and to bring about new possibilities. And yet the given is only revealed insofar as freedom makes choices. So the steepness of the mountain cannot reveal itself until I choose to climb the mountain. The difficulty of writing an essay, the writer's block and perfectionism that I face while writing are only emerging as a result of having chosen to write. And as every weightlifter knows very well, that the amount of resistance my muscles experience are the product of my choice to lift weights and in choosing to lift a certain amount. As such, the given is nothing other than the in itself annihilated by the for itself, which has to be it. This relationship between freedom and the given is called our situation. Situations are shaped by both the contingency of existence and the exercise of freedom. Thus, freedom and situation are interdependent, and one cannot exist without the other. Our situation manifests in various ways. It is my place, my body, my past, my position, insofar as it is already determined by the indications of others. Finally, my fundamental relationship to the other. In section 2, Sartre examines each of these, showing how, in every case, they are revealed through a dialectical relationship between freedom and facticity. So let's address each of these briefly. Sartre says in terms of place that it is defined by the spatial order and by the particular nature of the thises which are revealed to me on the ground of the world. While we have the freedom to choose our place to some extent, we are also constrained by the contingencies of birth and the physical realities of the world. Our place is both a given fact of our being and a relation to the world, defined by our actions and the ends we pursue. It is in the context of our chosen projects and future aspirations that our place gains any kind of meaning, transforming it from mere geometric coordinates into a symbol of our existential journeys. Another aspect of the situation is the past. Now, although freedom is manifested in our ability to pursue a future, this future can only be conceived in relation to the past. The past is the given that resists our freedom and thus allows our freedom to express itself, as it provides the context within which we define and pursue our future goals. And yet, while our freedom necessitates a past, the significance of that past is determined by our present choices and future projects. We cannot alter the brute facts of our past, but we can shape its meaning through the ends we pursue. And our freedom lies in the ability to choose how our past informs our acts, making the past an active participant in our ongoing project. As we modify our fundamental projects, the past can either retain its significance or sometimes become a mere historical relic, like ancient artifacts that have lost their original purpose and are merely now displayed in a museum. And so the future plays a crucial role in deciding whether the past remains alive or inert. Another aspect of the situation is the environment, which is distinct from the place one occupies. And this environment comprises the instrumental things that surround us. So the tools, for example, I use and all the things that I come to use. And thinking, for example, of Bill Gates, for example, he was born in a situation where he had computers around him, and if it wasn't for that, he wouldn't have perhaps created Microsoft and the software that emerged out of that. That there were givens about his environment that allowed him to use certain tools that weren't accessible should he have been born at another time. And yet, our freedom is not just the ability to choose these instruments within our environment, but also it's the ability to change that environment. And, we could think of someone like Bill Gates or other inventors or technological oriented individuals that have reshaped the terrain of our environments by the things that they have created. So the essence of freedom then is the ability to surpass the givens in our environment, to choose oneself in the process of surpassing and thereby shape both oneself and the environment through this continuous interaction. Now, not only am I a being for itself, but I'm also, as we learned previously, a being for others, which means that the concrete situation I find myself in has always already been shaped by the free choices of other consciousnesses, which provides a unique kind of resistance to my own freedom. And Sartre identifies three aspects of this dimension of the other that forms our situation. First, the instruments that make up my environment are already meaningful before I confer some meaning upon them. Sartre also talks about this influence of the other in terms of techniques, which here I think is sort of equivalent to the idea of skills. So, how I talk, how I walk, how I pass judgment, how I speak, and how I use certain tools under specific circumstances. All this has meanings infused in them prior to my having given them any meaning in my own freedom. And he focuses in on speech as one particular example. As a listener of speech, the meaning of those sentences spoken lie in the speaker's intention for Sartre. And I won't get into all the debatable aspects of that claim when we get into, for example, Lacan, who has a very different view about language here. The speaker, through their act of speaking, is the foundation of language, and it is this freedom of expression that underlies and forms the laws of language, rather than the laws of language operating independently of in some abstract way. Thus, language is not an independent entity that speaks itself, but it's a tool that is animated and given meaning by the speaker's free choices. Second, I discover myself having been given a meaning. Here we refer to the various collective identities that we find ourselves belonging to: professional groups, nationalities, races, religions, social economic groups, etc. It's in this context that Sartre introduces the concept of the unrealizable, which refers to these aspects of our being that we cannot fully realize or internalize ourselves, but that are made concrete for others, such as being handsome, ugly, or belonging to a certain race. We can only understand these unrealizables in the context of our own projects and choices, and we are condemned to freedom in the sense that we must choose how to assume these aspects of our being, even though they are fundamentally beyond our control. They're identities that have been given to us by others and not meanings that we have created ourselves. And yet, we are responsible for how we assume these identities and what they come to mean for us after having encountered them as resistances that are part of our situation. Third, the other is the center of reference to which all these meanings refer. And as we've already learned from previous chapters, there are limitations of freedom imposed by the other's perception, which defines the for itself in ways it has not chosen and cannot necessarily change. And alienation represents a factual limit to freedom as the for itself becomes an object in the eyes of the other, shaping its situation and the boundaries of its freedom. And as such, our freedom comes up against a limit in the existence and freedom of others, creating a situation of alienation that we simply cannot escape. This alienation is not an internal flaw, but an essential characteristic of our situation, which exists for others and is outside our direct control. Yet, once again, and we've reiterated this theme a couple times, we can only experience the limits imposed by others' freedom when we freely recognize and assume our being for others, thus giving meaning to our situation in light of our chosen ends. So again, our freedom, our choice to assert our freedom, is what reveals the resistances of being for others and encountering their gaze. Ultimately, our freedom recovers its own limits by recognizing and assuming the alienated aspects of our existence, which are defined by our interactions with others. A final concept pertaining to situation is death. However, it would not seem that death is part of our situation in the way we might expect it if familiar with how Heidegger approaches this topic. For Heidegger, being toward death was a pivotal element of one's authentic existence. However, Sartre challenges Heidegger's idea that death is a uniquely personal event that can be awaited and that confers individuality upon one's existence. Death becomes a personal event only when viewed through the lens of subjectivity. It is not death itself that individualizes, but our subjective experience of it. And for this reason, there is nothing unique about death, nothing that makes it mine more than anything else. For example, nobody can love for me, if we mean by that to make vows which are my vows, to experience the emotions which are my emotions. Sartre also critiques the idea that the closure of our life's account, given through death, can give that life meaning if we do not choose the moment of closure ourselves. He argues that if the final minute of our life, which could change its entire meaning, is not determined by us, then the true meaning of our life remains elusive, highlighting a tension between the freedom of our actions and the predetermined nature of our end. If death is not a freely determined aspect of our being, it cannot complete our life, leaving the significance of our existence beyond our grasp. Thus, death is never that which gives life its meaning. It is, on the contrary, that which on principle removes all meaning from life. Death also signifies the triumph of the other's perspective over the self, as the other becomes the guardian of the deceased life, shaping its memory and legacy. The relationship with the dead is an inherent aspect of being for others, where each individual organizes the dead into collective masses or distinct individualities, thereby the other defining their own identity in relation to the deceased. So, in essence, to die is to become entirely subject to the perspective of the other, who then becomes the arbiter of the meaning and value of my existence after I have died. As Sartre writes, to be dead is to be a prey for the living. All of this makes death in no way part of the ontological structure of my being, insofar as my being is for itself. My death is a certain aspect of facticity, an unrealizable par excellence, and as such, a mode of being for others, marking the ultimate limit of my subjectivity. This also means that death is not an obstacle to my projects, because when it happens, I am no longer a for itself, freely choosing acts towards certain ends. I do not affirm myself against death. I do not meet death as a resistance when acting freely, but my freedom is always acting independent from it. In this chapter, we have heard Sartre argue that freedom is not an escape from contingency, but a way of engaging with it, and that our choices, while free, are also bound by the factual limitations of our existence. This relationship between freedom and facticity is a dynamic one, as freedom requires a given not as a condition, but as a point of departure for choice and action. Human reality is defined by being in a situation, which accounts for both our current state and our potential to go beyond it. And no situation can overpower our freedom or make us more free than another. Our freedom is demonstrated through our choices, and ultimately, our situations are revealed only by the concrete choices we make. Thus, situations are neither purely objective nor subjective, but a result of freedom illuminating constraints in our life. Humans are condemned to be free and must assume responsibility for this freedom, including the situations they find themselves in, and to assume this responsibility without excuse or resignation. Each of us, according to Sartre, is an absolute choice of self, inseparable from the historical context of our existence. We are not victims of circumstance, but active participants who define our own meaning within the world, bearing full responsibility for our actions and their consequences. This responsibility extends to all aspects of life, including our birth and the events we encounter after that. And these are opportunities for us to shape our being. True freedom lies in acknowledging this responsibility without remorse, without excuses, even though, more often than not, we seek to avoid facing this reality, fleeing from the anguish of responsibility that we experience before it, and into bad faith. If you found this video helpful, feel free to support this work by liking this video, sharing it on different platforms, subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. And if you want to support this work in other ways, you can do so through the Super Thanks option here on YouTube. And to be an ongoing supporter, you can do so on Patreon, where I offer video transcripts, unedited materials, and prioritize comments and questions here on YouTube. The link is below. I would like to thank the following for already being supporters of this channel on Patreon. So we've got one more video, and it'll focus on the concept of existential psychoanalysis, which will be an interesting coming together of worlds of the different series I present here on this channel. And then we'll have a concluding video after that. And looking forward to moving through these next few videos to complete the book Being in Nothingness. So I look forward to seeing you again. Thanks for watching to the end. Until next time, be well.